Welcome to another episode of the Incident Commander series. On today's show, we're going to explore the role of an incident commander with yet another special guest, Tony Kirtley. Tony currently works as a global leader at IBM Xforce. Tony has many years of incident commander experience and is here with us today to share his experience as an incident commander. Welcome to the show, Tony, and thank you for taking the time today to share your journey as an incident commander with the community. How do you see the incident commander role?
I have often equated the role of the incident commander as the conductor of the orchestra. A lot of people characterize an incident commander as someone who's leading communications or who's being the project manager. And yeah, you do that, but it's more than that. You're the advisor to the client. You're the very close confidant. I always say that the incident commander is often a doctor, a firefighter, and a counselor all at the same time. So there's many things that you've got to keep in mind and many skills that you have to have. But keeping on top of everything and making sure everyone's going in the same direction and working in concert, that's the essence of the incident commander.
What is your signature?
Yeah, you know, a lot of how the incident is going to run is based on how the incident commander or the lead of an incident, whether or not they're titled incident commander, sets the expectations of how it's going to go, especially if the organization hasn't experienced that incident type before. My mind always goes to ransomware because they're the messiest and require the most effort. So setting the expectation of like a ransomware incident is very important because people want to sprint, they want to go, they think they can get through it in 2 days, and you have to tell them, yeah, you're going to have to sprint, but after that, you're going to have to run a marathon, and then after that, more marathons, because if you do it right, you're going to take all of that you've learned from the incident and implement improvements in your security program. That takes a lot of effort and a lot of really concerted effort. So the sprint, and then everyone says it's not a marathon, it's a sprint. I always say it is a sprint and then a marathon when it comes to uh, doing a ransomware incident. And if someone gets overwhelmed with how much work is in front of them, I always use the eating the elephant analogy. How do you eat an elephant one bite at a time, right?
Mhm.
And so taking the large, task that you have of recovering the business, you just have to break that down into smaller tasks in bite-sized so that you can manage it. And that usually helps a little bit, and it helps if the incident commander is very organized and can help the client break down the task into manageable sized chunks. So, and another thing I like to use throughout the incident, not
Mhm.
only in the beginning, I don't really find that I can do this in the beginning, but after I build a little trust and build a little rapport with the client, I use humor to kind of lighten the mood and show that, hey, I'm not stressed.
Mhm.
So, you don't need to be stressed or as stressed. Certainly there a little bit of stress kind of prompts people to action, but
Mhm.
using a little bit of humor in a war room is a great way to lighten the mood and to kind of break down to become human to your client, allow them to become human to you. And that is what kind of binds you. Have you heard of the term trauma bonding?
I
You're
haven't.
going through
Want to
trauma
explain that
bonding.
maybe? Yeah, maybe explain that to the
Yeah,
audience.
trauma bonding is it is very frequent in the military when people go through very hard times together,
Mhm.
traumas almost, they become bonded because that trauma elicits intense emotions, and whether it's negative, in the case of traumas, it's negative.
Mhm.
But sharing that negative experience, that extreme negative experience, bonds people together. So if you can experience that with your client, you're building a trust with them, you're building a rapport, and you're more likely to have that relationship after the incident is over. And you get good customer sat surveys as a result too, because they liked working with you. So injecting humor and a little bit of personality, just showing that you're human,
Mhm.
allowing the client to connect with you on a human level is a huge part of being an effective incident commander.
Leadership challenges.
Yeah, aside from the physical challenges that I mentioned before and emotional stress,
Mhm.
I see oftentimes some CISOs that are faced with especially an existential threat to the business kind of incident. They have sort of a self-preservation kind of challenge, like, am I going to lose my job, am I going to be here? So it really takes a toll on them. And the so there's a little bit of, hey, could I have prevented this? Is this my fault? Could I
Mhm.
have done anything to help, prevent it from happening? And so there's a lot of self-doubt. And the ones that I find can put that aside and just power through are the most successful, and also the ones that can successfully lean on the experts and understand that, hey, I haven't been through this, but my DFIR firm that I've hired does this every day. So let me lean on them. Let me, acknowledge them as the experts and
Mhm.
take their advice. And those are the most successful ones too. But that's really hard for some people. And then once the dust settles, the CISO that can be really successful if they survive the incident in their job is taking what they learned and applying that to better the security posture of the organization. And so that's a challenge, I think. It really takes a toll on people, and we see people leave the organization after an incident and say, incident response isn't for me, or security isn't for me. I'm going to go do something else. Or maybe the CISO is the head that has to roll, um, because to show others that the organization is taking accountability.
Mhm.
And so those are the challenges that we see with the leaders in dealing with these kinds of incidents.
Okay. So in your experience, if you compare with leaders that have never had a major incident versus leaders that have had maybe a couple of them, does that influence their future incidents and the way they manage these incidents going forward in a positive or sometimes negative way?
Yes, in both positive and negative ways. The one that has been through, and let's take ransomware again,
Mhm.
as an example. The one that has been through it before once may th- harken back to their knowledge of how they dealt with it, although it may be very different in it may have been at a different organization, but even with the same organization, that person may rely too heavily on their experience from the one time they've done it.
Mhm.
And hopefully that person doesn't over rely on themselves and their knowledge and experience and undervalue the expertise that the third party DFIR firm is going to bring. So yeah, there can be, it depends on how the CISO handles that. It can be detrimental or it can be helpful. I've seen people get hired in organization security programs because they've been through that kind of thing,
Mhm.
and they become valued. But again, we all have to be humble enough to understand what we know and what we don't know, and rely on those who have the expertise where we may not.
Prioritization.
This is an interesting question. And my mind goes back to an incident that I worked on with a small marketing firm that that was down with ransomware, and uh, they had zero plans. They didn't have any response plans or disaster recovery plans or anything. So basically, I walked them through a business impact analysis, a hasty one, a very hasty one. Got everyone in the room, including the CFO, who the IT director reported to, and said, "What is most important to your business right now?" And what surprised me, it wasn't payroll, it wasn't really operations per se, like the systems that run operations. It was printing. They and it was because in their unique situation at that moment, their warehouses were full and they needed printers to print labels so that they could ship some of the product
Mm-hmm.
and get it out of the warehouses because they had more coming in. So it's not what you would think, and I think it highlights the fact that you can make an assumption about what's most important to a business, but it ultimately needs to be stated by the business, and that's what drives priority. So the things that enabled printing, that's what we got up first. So it comes down to that.
It's interesting that you mentioned. I remember doing an incident, and this often comes up when I prepare organizations both from an IT and an OT environment. And we basically had a ransomware case in a organization that had both areas, so to speak. And what was really interesting is they actually didn't care that IT was totally down, basically totally ransomware, because you were actually talking about printing. It was actually also a printing business, and they
Hmm.
basically just the printers to work. As long as the printers were printing the newspapers, the magazines that they were printing, they were basically happy. And IT basically stayed down for what, 2 3 weeks without any
Wow.
problems, as they were
Hmm.
basically rebuilding it. But the printers were working, and the customer was kind of happy from that perspective. What is the hardest part?
So when the pressure's on, I think of ransomware incidents. Obviously, those are the most kind of critical, business critical types of incidents where urgency and importance of bringing the business back online is paramount. And I've noticed that in leading those types of incidents, they have quite a toll on people. And there's different emotions that come out. There's different physical aspects, declining health, panic attacks, heart problems
Mhm.
that occur, and um, managing people, leaders of the organization through those kinds of aspects is, I think, the toughest part of the job. That you can get used to the technical aspects, you get used to what needs to be done in general. Every environment's different, but
Mhm.
the general process is roughly the same. But managing that emotional aspect and the response of the individuals, that's in my view the toughest part.
Okay. And this brings us to the topic of resilience of the role, both for the stakeholders in your ecosystem, but for yourself. If you're dealing yourself as an incident commander, it puts a lot of pressure on yourself as well. How do you ensure resiliency in that particular role? And what tips could you potentially provide for people that are thinking about creating this incident commander role in their organization, basically from scratch sometimes?
Yeah, it's tough, and it different people handle the stresses of the job in different ways.
Mhm.
Um, I feel like I've always been, you know, suited for it, I guess. And I feel like in when the pressure's on, I feel like my blood pressure actually goes down
Mhm.
because I'm able to clarify what I'm doing, put everything else aside, and it's justifiable, right? Because you've got to solve this problem. And so when I'm able to hyper focus on a problem,
Mhm.
it I think it my role is better defined and I can just dig in and execute. And so but not everybody's wired the same. So I think in general, in order to make the job sustainable, there's a few things that I would recommend. First, I think people need to be in good physical health if you're unhealthy and stress affects you more prominently when you're in these types of situations. So the healthier you are going in, the better you're going to be able to handle the physical stresses of being an incident commander. Another way is, if you manage teams like this, you got to give them a rest. You got to give them time off in between incidents. You can't
Mm.
go from one to the next. Or in most cases, when a person is managing a tough incident that requires all of their attention, that needs to be the only thing that they have. You can't give them other tasks. You can't give them more than one incident that is highly stressful.
Mm.
Maybe on the tail end of a ransomware where there's, daily touch points and other people are doing the work, you can take something, but be mindful of how much stress that puts on a person, and giving them rest is essential, because think about it, you're making them miss out on the rest of life
Mm.
when they need to be 100% focused on an incident. And so everyone has things outside of work they need to attend to or want to attend to. So giving them that break after an incident is going to be critical to long-term sustainability of a person in the role.
What are the sort of conflicting priorities at the start of an incident?
That's a very important question, and one that we often see. For forensic investigations, you often have two investigations going on in parallel if there's a data breach involved.
Mhm.
One is, of course, the root cause analysis, and the
Mhm.
other is the data breach investigation. And different stakeholders want the answers to those investigations as a priority. So ultimately, it comes down to the business and what the business is considering a priority. And we as consultants just need to lay out, hey, here's what we have available to bring to bear to this problem, uh, and we're able to do this much, uh, and lay out the all of the facts so that the business can make a decision on what is a priority. And as far as communications, um, I found that getting on top of the communications early, executives want answers, um, communicating to them early and in a way that they can understand, and creating a cadence out of that is essential in setting expectations. So it is hard to juggle all these priorities, but that's how I would approach it.
Okay. And I mean, ideally, a reporting cadence or an operational cadence is defined upfront in an incident response plan, right? But sometimes you come into an organization that hasn't done any of that de- definition making.
Right.
What is the general operational cadence that you would advocate to start with, both from a reporting to executives and on the other side, reporting or taking reports in from the tech teams?
Um, Typically for it, uh, incidents that are very urgent, high stakes incidents, I like to settle on a twice a day reporting cadence. And basically, it is uh, from the client organization and all the leads of my team.
Mm.
Maybe the incident commander and the tech lead will get on a status call with the client twice a day, once in the morning, once in the evening.
Mhm.
And some clients require more or try to push us to have more. But if you have more than twice a day, it really just gets in the way of making progress. And so we always try to convince the client that, hey, twice a day is good. And even if we're in a follow the sun analysis model, do an analysis around the clock,
Mm.
uh, still twice a day, I believe is in most cases the best reporting cadence.
What about cultural differences in the ecosystem?
Yes, two examples come to mind. In both are from the days before COVID where we were more prevalently going on site. And one of them, you and I worked on together, Kuhn, where we went on site
Hmm.
for a client in the Middle East. The incident happened to be during Ramadan. And for those who don't know, in Muslim countries that observe Ramadan, there is no eating or drinking during the day in public. So those of us who are used to eating during the day and
Hmm.
not observing that normally, we'd have to sneak, hide away and go eat or drink water.
Yeah,
So it
I
was very,
remember us sneaking out of the conference room where we
hmm
were just to drink water out of respect of the others, right? Because it
yeah,
felt the right thing to do. And I remember that, we had good breakfast at the hotel in the morning because we were in a Western hotel, and making sure that we respected basically those cultural differences.
yes, exactly. And also something that comes to mind is the um, women in the workplace, and you know we in the West shake everyone's hands, men,
Mhm.
women, doesn't matter. But that's not part of their culture in the Middle East. A man doesn't shake a woman's hand, and so that takes some getting used to. If it's automatic when you meet
Mhm.
someone, you shake their hand, but that's not what you do there. Another different incident that comes to mind is one that I responded to in Israel,
Mhm.
and it while we were there, they celebrated Yom Kippur and the Day of Atonement in Israel. The
Mhm.
whole country shuts down, and basically the team that I was with and I basically stayed in the hotel for the day and just collaborated with ourselves. But we had to get food the day before to eat that day, and it was just an adjustment that we had to make.
What was your biggest win?
Winning and being proud and what you consider a win is relative, but one that comes to mind, uh, an incident that comes to mind that I get a lot of war stories out of,
Mhm.
is with a small marketing company that I mentioned before that wanted their printers brought back online first. Um, I I talk about the emotional response to ransomware, and this company had ransomware. They were totally down, and in that, I my friend Terry McGraw and I developed a talk that equated the emotional response to ransomware to the Kubler-Ross stages of grief.
Mhm.
Um, And at the end of the stages of grief is acceptance. There's all kinds of turmoil that goes on in between or before that. But in the case of ransomware, you want that uh, the victim to get to acceptance as quickly as possible because that's where the better decisions are made. And the win that we had here was that the IT director actually had a panic attack before
Mhm.
I got there as incident commander. So I
Okay.
had to assume the role of incident commander and his role managing his staff, reporting to the CFO who could barely spell cyber, and making the decisions for, you know, the response. And that CFO placed a lot of trust in me. And so, in my view, he got to acceptance very quickly.
Mhm.
He says, "What do you need to get us through this?" And so I brought in a recovery firm right away. I got my investigators online remotely. We were investigating and working through the response, and it went very, very well. And so I consider this one, in a lot of respects, a big win.
Improvising on the fly.
I don't think organizations have enough playbooks in the first place. So having a playbook is definitely way better than not having a playbook at all.
Mhm.
So that's one thing I find that playbooks aren't as prevalent as they should be. But back in, I don't know, over a decade and a half ago,
Mhm.
before the era of EDR, we had a problem where we had hosts inside our environment that were beaconing out to known command and control domains on the internet.
Mhm.
And so we would look at the DNS logs, and we'd find the those domains associated with an internal IP address, and we'd go, remediate that IP address. And turns out that that IP address, because of DHCP leases being short, were a different host than the one that actually browsed to the malicious domain. And so we were like, well, shoot, how do we solve this problem? So I had a guy that we created black hole domains in our internal domain controllers. And so when someone tried to browse to that domain, they would go to a server that we would then in turn ran a script that queried that host for its identity, basically the host name. We didn't rely on the IP address anymore because that was unreliable.
Mhm.
So we wanted the host name, and so then we used that script to get the right host to remediate. Uh, it's just a very simple example. Back in the day when we didn't have the technology that we have today, that we adapted to a particular problem. So I'm sure there's all kinds of innovation that's going on everywhere in this case. But I'll go back to what I said in the beginning, that I think that we as consultants, and even members of corporations out there, having to innovate all the time because there's not sufficient playbooks in place to handle certain incidents. And so people are reinventing the wheel, or do you know doing ad hoc tasks that they think need to be done, because there's not a plan, there's not a playbook in place. So my advice to everyone would be, anticipate those common incidents, create playbooks for them, and seek help if you don't have the expertise to do that.
So, and the solution that you were mentioning that you put together at the time is with DNS sinkhole, I guess, right?
Yeah,
Gathering from the information you got. Okay, that's really interesting because that's one of the techniques I used in the early days too. Really effective, simple, but it worked, right?
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, on the topic of playbooks, and this is kind of an open question with something I see in the field, is obviously we tend to create playbooks for incident types, right? So, you create a playbook for ransomware, you create a playbook for, I don't know, business email compromise. But things tend to sometimes merge or basically become really foggy, like, a account compromised, potentially with a business email compromise as the first entry, then moves to ransomware or data leak following a a pre-ransomware intrusion. Um, how do you think we should best in the industry? And this is really an open question. There's no right or wrong because it's something I'm personally processing on at the moment. Is how do we ensure that we've got enough playbooks, as you said, because you said we need more playbooks, right? So, but how do we
Hmm.
also make sure that we don't over document or create this beast of documentation, which in the end is not going to be used? One of the things that I really am strong on when we do documentation for our customers is keep it usable, right? Because if you're creating a
Yes.
playbook and no one's going to use it, the playbook is kind of useless. But how would you go about and making sure that, you're covering basically all of these different incident types while still considering some of the, let's say, common patterns, maybe triage, host isolation, recovery processes, etc.
Yeah. That's a very good point, Kuhn. And I think of playbooks in terms of, if you think about an incident type, it's basically classified as based on the actions on the objective. What's the end result of the incident that the threat actor is trying to achieve?
Mm-hmm.
And you can gamify most of it, but not all of it. You may have different attack vectors um, that made up that anatomy of the attack. But ultimately, to recover from a data breach, or to recover from ransomware or an insider threat, um, I think that you can generalize playbooks well enough to cover most situations, and then you rely on that innovation that you talked about um, in the unique situation
Mm.
where the playbook doesn't go far enough, it is or is too general. Then you rely on that innovation either by the internal staff or by the third party. And so there's a happy medium
Mm.
uh, for playbooks not to be not over documented, but documented well enough to give you a general direction on the tasks that need to be accomplished to respond to a particular incident type.
Third-party vendor challenges.
I'll answer the question in two ways, and I'll put vendors both in terms of the vendors that I bring to the table
Mhm.
and the vendors that of the client organization and the challenges working with them when you have the opportunity to work with them. So first, the vendors that I bring to the table,
Mhm.
I find that you really have to have done your homework in vetting vendors, working with them to the left of boom to establish the roles and responsibilities, establish expertise that they bring, and make sure you're choosing the right vendor. Because oftentimes, if you don't do that, oftentimes, and even if you do, you could still get this. Uh, you'll get people that don't have the expertise you need. They don't have the sense of urgency that you need
Mhm.
because me as the IR consultant, I'm ultimately accountable to the client, and that partner is accountable to me. And so they may not have the same sense of urgency that you do or the expertise that you expect. So that's the challenge I see uh, with delivery partners, is how I term them, that you're bringing to an incident. Now, I've had a few opportunities to work, believe it or not, with a client's third-party vendors.
Mhm.
In one case that I recall, the third-party vendor was the source of the breach,
Mm.
and the client gave us the green light, and the third-party vendor agreed to it at first to actually investigate their environment,
Mhm.
and it was very telling. And after a few days, the third party was like, I don't think this is a good idea. We want you to stop. And it's probably good that they stopped us, because what we were finding in those few days was very telling and very damning from the third party vendor perspective. They have their own self interest, they have their own self preservation, and so they were kind of a blocker for our investigation into their environment, understandably. So that's the kind of challenges you run into with third parties. The more you can bring to bear organically, obviously, the better. But nobody does everything, um, and nobody should do everything. I think that third parties are very useful to bring that focused expertise. You want someone that does something very, very well. And if you're just dabbling in something, it's hard to do it very well. So I think that third parties are good to use. It's
Mhm.
just a matter of getting the right one and working well with them.
So how do you ensure? So a lot of organizations will work with vendors and depend on um, standard certifications, for example, on validating the posture of a specific vendor. Do you think that the organizations should go a step further and actually more often maybe test if these suppliers or vendors are actually delivering up to standards as they claim to be?
Yeah, that I mean, you could put a lot of effort into doing that, into certifying third parties. I find that having a relationship with them, having experience with them is the most telling. Um, and what I like to try to do when vetting a new third party to work with,
Mhm.
I like to run them through a tabletop. For example, here's how we go to war, and let's kind of test this out in a tabletop scenario together, so that to kind of tease out what those um, what those nuances are, what potential conflicts or potential roadblocks you're going to have, and do that before you get in front of a client, because it's very embarrassing if you have those snafus during a client engagement.
Building up your IC skills.
But I think in general, the skills that one needs to be trained on is, one, the basic incident response process. There are different schools of thought out there, but understanding an incident response process and how to properly respond to an incident, understanding the threat, understanding how to deal with the threat in different situations, that's critical. It helps if you understand the basic concepts, at least of project management, because ultimately, in a very complex incident, there are a lot of work streams, and those work streams have to be managed. It helps, certainly, if it's big enough, to have an actual project manager assigned to the incident so that they can track the task and the status. And in large enterprises, it's especially important and pretty natural for them to do that. And then the last is communication skills. So again, an incident commander is a communicator, and that person can can make or break the client satisfaction of a response, because that person is the face of the response organization of the DFIR firm to the client. And if the incident commander possesses good communication skills, it can go very well. Conversely, it can go badly if that person has bad communication skills. So I would say incident response process, project management, at least the basics of project management and how to break down tasks and work streams, and then communication skills would be the most important in my mind.
What does the so what mean to you?
This is very important because ultimately this is the legacy that the client's left with um, after an incident that you've helped them with. The report, meaning, and during the course of the incident, I think asking questions, listening to their concerns, will give you an idea of what's important to the client. You can anticipate what's important based on experience, based on what the business does. Understanding what the business does is also very important for an incident commander to do. Um, but you know, understanding what's important to the client, which is usually, how is this going to affect my business? Then you need to frame the communications in terms of the business and how it's going to affect the business. You can't just leave it as, we recovered 500 hosts and we evicted the threat actor and leave it there. You've got to tell the client why that's important to their business, and maybe pull that thread a little bit to say, we recovered the business operations, whatever business operations you recovered in X time frame, and um, put it in terms that the business people can understand. And if you can even quantify it to dollars, then that's even better, because that's how executives think. They can think in terms of the the bottom line, dollars and cents to the business. So that'd be my general advice, is to just the put the details of the incident in terms that executives can understand. Usually that's how it affects the business.
If you like the content of this episode, do not hesitate to leave a like, comment, and subscribe and follow the series on the various platforms it is provided on. Please also feel free to suggest any topics of interest that you'd like to see discussed on this series.